Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of a new podcast called The Crime Center here on YouTube and on Spotify. So we'll get right into it today. We're going to be discussing the disturbing case of O.J. Simpson. This is a conversation with Carter Covington, that's me, and Anna Brasil Coughlin. So let's get right into it. So let's meet Anna Brasil Coughlin. She was born on the island of Terceira, Azores, and she was raised in the great state of New Jersey. She loves writing, and she's currently a medium writer as well as a new published author on Amazon. So thank you, Anna, for being with us today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here with you.
All right, so you can check out Anna's work on Medium at Anna Coughlin. There she writes true crime stories for many different publications, and she's been pretty successful on that front. So then let's get into me. So my name's Carter Covington. That's my pen name, and I am a medium true crime writer as well. I was born and raised in New Jersey, and you can find me at GavinNYR30 on Medium. And today we're going to be discussing the case of O.J. Simpson, as I said, and the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. So I'm just going to open it up to Anna right now to get her thoughts, her preliminary thoughts on this case.
My thoughts are that this is still a fascinating case, and people, it's still divided amongst race, and I don't know if any minds have been changed. Probably people who thought he was guilty then probably still think so, and also people who thought he was innocent probably still think he's innocent.
And just before we get into this case, I just want to get a word from our sponsor today. So our book, Real Life Murder, is now out on Amazon. It's 99 cents, and the link will be in the description below if you want to go check that out. The book is filled with numerous true crime stories, from John Benet Ramsey to Gwen. And I don't know her last name at this current moment, but I know that that was a very good story. And it's a great book that you should definitely check out if you're a true crime fanatic like me and Anna. So let's get into the timeline of O.J. Simpson. And this timeline was used in the case very prolifically. And this is the night in 1994 where Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman were murdered. That was the night of June 12th, 1994. So I'm just going to run through some of the timeline of O.J. Simpson, and then we can get your thoughts on that. So at 9:36 p.m., Simpson was wearing a dark sweatsuit, and he was seen by his friend and also his roommate, Cato Kalin. At 9:30 to 9:45, Charles Cale, walking his dog by Simpson's Rockingham residence, did not see the infamous white Bronco. So the prosecution, led by Marcia Clark, said that the murder had to take place between 10:15 and 10:40. That would give Simpson enough time to return to his house by 10:51. So Simpson then returned to his house at about 10:51, according to his roommate, and the white Bronco was parked. Simpson then took off on a flight to Chicago, Illinois at about 11 o'clock, which was 2 hours after his scheduled flight was to leave. So that's the timeline of O.J. Simpson, the basic timeline of him and that night. Now let's get on to Nicole's story. She was found at about 10:50. There was a police call that went out, and people responded to the scene to find two slain bodies. They were in very poor states. And they also found some very odd evidence found on the scene. And if you want to talk about some points that I just made there, go ahead.
Well, they found Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman butchered. Really, I mean, this was definitely a case of overkill.
Exactly.
It looked very personal. because this person was obviously in a rage, and you know, and we and then of course the police were called, and then it started the investigation, in which led them to Simpson, because he had a record of abusing his wife. So naturally, he immediately came to mind.
Yeah.
And that's
And I just want to get into a great point that you made: personal versus accidental. Personal, you can really tell if something is a crime of passion, where if there are 40 stab wounds versus 3 or 2, two stab wounds could mean anything, but 40 stab wounds means that this person had a very deep connection with the victim, or it's just a case of a deranged person. But in this case, and I don't want to jump to any conclusions here, but this seemed to be a crime of personal belief and a crime of passion by the killer, who we still do not legally know.
right, because normally when someone kills someone, you know, they kill them, but they want to get out of there as soon as possible. They want to run because they don't not want to be caught. But this person was just slicing and dicing, and just in a fit of rage, just want to overkill.
Yeah. And I think that was a point that the prosecution touched on briefly in their case against O.J. Simpson, where they said again that he wasn't too nervous about being caught. He stood there on her doorstep and murdered two people 40 times, stabbing them like over and over again. So yeah, I definitely agree. So I just wanted to get into some criminal trial evidence that I found very damning. Like you had mentioned, the 911 call and the history of Simpson's violence directed at Nicole Brown. They had a very extensive record in terms of domestic abuse and domestic violence. I think that there was 5 calls made, and Simpson was warned 5 times, but he was never filed in a court of law. However, I do believe that there was a restraining order on Simpson by Nicole Brown. And that really touches on the Me Too era that we're living in, where so many women are taken advantage of by spouses and by superiors in any kind of setting, really.
You know, that brings up a good point, because the cops were called to their house numerous occasions, and they never arrested him. I think once, but most of the time they would just let him go. They would come and let him go. You know, if it was someone else, someone that wasn't a celebrity, someone that the cops did not like, they would have taken him in. But they gave him a lot of passes, which is really contradictory to the fact that supposedly they hated him and wanted to frame him.
Yeah. And I think that protocol really is big in this case on many different fronts, but the fact that Simpson was a celebrity really, really plays a factor in this. And the fact that he was, like you said, let go many times just because of his stature, because these police officers looked at him as like this hero, this football hero who was very successful. I think, and I have my paper here, he won the Heisman Trophy for best college football player. He made the Pro Bowl. He was a halfback for the San Francisco 49ers. He was a commentator for ABC, Monday Night Football, and he was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So he had a pretty extensive and pretty good record and football career overall. So I just wanted to go ahead.
He was an American hero.
Yeah.
People loved him. People that know him said he was very charming, very charismatic, and he brought you in, and people just adored him.
Correct.
They were, yeah, even though behind they knew that he was beating his wife.
Yeah. And you brought up a good point that he's so charming. And one person that can really speak to that is Kris Jenner, formerly known as Kris Kardashian. She was a friend of Nicole. She was Nicole's best friend. And as many people know, Robert Kardashian represented O.J. Simpson in his trial. And she has always said that he was one of the most charming people that she ever got to know. And that he was a charmer and that he really got away with things. And that's a problem.
Yeah.
I just want to – oh, go ahead.
Kris Jenner, I remember I was watching, this was live on TV. I would watch it every single time, every day. It was fascinating. One time, Kris Jenner was walking into court, and one of the reporters was asking about OJ, and she said that that Nicole told her that OJ was going to kill her, Nicole, and get away with it.
Yep.
And obviously,
that's actually in my notes right here. That's a great point. That is in the evidence that was not brought up in court due to the fact that it can't be validated. But I mean, why would you talk about such thing? And I just want to get into the second piece of evidence that I want to bring up in this criminal trial. And I think that this was the first criminal trial in which they used forensic evidence to the extent that they did. Hair evidence was found.
It is.
So there was hair evidence found on a cap at the Bundy residence that matched O.J. Simpson. And it was the same hair that was found on Ron Goldman's shirt at Nicole Brown Simpson's house. The third piece of evidence is fiber evidence, cotton fibers that were consistent with the carpet in the Bronco, and they were found on the glove at Rockingham. And there was a lot of blood evidence used in this case, a lot of blood evidence. The killer was not very smooth with this murder. The killer was messy. The killer left a lot of things. The killer left a lot of loose ends as well. And they left a lot of blood in different places, and it was found in the Bronco. That was Ron Goldman's blood was found in the Bronco, and blood was found at the Simpson residence. However, they still cannot get a conviction, which is something that we'll talk about a little bit later with the trial. But I just wanted to go through the case first. So I think that is it for evidence. Those were the main pieces of evidence. But I wanted to touch on one thing with the evidence, and that was the strange reaction to the phone call informing O.J. Simpson about the death of Nicole Brown Simpson. And I do not have the transcript in front of me, but the detectives did say that he was not heartbroken. He kind of accepted it, and they said that it was chilling because he knew that she had died. That's what they said. But I found that very, very disturbing.
The problem with that is that a good defense attorney would say, well, yeah, of course, it's not what you expected. The man was in shock. You know, he was in shock. He had no idea that this was going to happen. I mean, so someone's demeanor is very, very tricky because you never know how people are going to react. And just because they act one way or another way does not necessarily prove guilt.
Exactly. So I think that we're good with the timeline. I just want to touch on one more thing with the timeline, and then we can move on to the trial. O.J. Simpson post-trial has had a very difficult life and has not stayed out of the law. I wanted to touch on his interaction with police in 2007. So O.J. was arrested on September 16th, 2007 in connection with a robbery at a Las Vegas hotel room on September 13th, 2007. OJ was then found guilty on 12 counts, including kidnapping and armed robbery. He was going after some football memorabilia in a hotel room that somebody had, quote, stolen from him. That's his words, not mine. And he ended up getting charged with it. However, July 20th, 2017, a Nevada parole board granted Simpson parole. And October 1st, 2017, Simpson was released from prison, and he currently resides in the Nevada area and has kept a kind of low profile for 4 years now. However, I do want to get into the book that he wrote post-trial, which I found to be very disturbing. The book was called If I Did It. And the If I Did It book was about if OJ had committed these murders, how would he do it? And I found it extremely chilling and extremely disturbing how he goes through how he would kill his wife and Ron Goldman if he did do it. So I just thought that that was interesting to release a book 12 years after your ex-wife was murdered.
Yes. Well, he'd probably do anything for money, so I'm not that surprised.
Yeah, he seems like the type to do anything for money. And we can get to another piece of evidence now, but I do want to get into the main trial and the storylines that surrounded the main trial. Of course, people know that it was called the trial of the century, and I know that you had firsthand knowledge into this trial. You were engrossed by it, and the entire nation was. So what was that trial like for you as a viewer? And if you could put yourself into O.J. Simpson's shoes, how was it like for him?
Well, it was fascinating and yet very long. And the DNA stuff was very involved and very, very tedious, and it would go on for hours and hours. And a lot of it was over my head, and I'm sure over the jury's head as well. OJ was in good shape because he had a jury, I think, that was very sympathetic to him. And obviously it was.
Yeah.
And he had the dream team that would just say or do anything to get him out, find him, get him out of there. And they did.
That's a very good point, because I thought that the defense team was very well stacked. The team was very well organized, and as you see on the screen right now, we have Marcia Clark to the left, O.J. Simpson in the middle, and that was right after his Bronco chase. We're not going to touch on that too much today, but he did have a Bronco chase with I think it was A.J. Coughlin. Mr. Coughlin was driving, and O.J. had a gun to his head and was suicidal and almost killed himself right there on the freeway. And then to the right, you have the late Johnny Cochran. And he really had a team of Robert Shapiro and Robert Kardashian and Alan Dershowitz, too, who is a very well-known attorney these days. And they had this dream team, and their job was very hard. But Marcia Clark's and Mr. Darwin's job was even harder because they had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And all the defense had to do was have this suspicion or this sense of doubt on the minds of the jurors, and they could not convict. The famous line was, if the glove does not fit, you cannot convict. I think that was it. But, yeah.
Yes, that's correct. That was it, yeah. But that was
Go ahead.
That was a very big mistake by Chris Darden to have him try on the glove, which obviously he's not going to make it fit, because if the glove fit, that means he was guilty.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
of course you see him struggling and making faces and it doesn't fit. Of course, that was a very, very big mistake by Darden. And of course, you played it off like it didn't fit, and it didn't fit, so you must have quit.
Yep, that was a pivotal part in this case and in this trial. And I really saw the faces of the prosecution just turn to nothingness, because they know right then and there that they had lost that case, and the jury knew it too, and they were all on Team Simpson after that, and there was not much debate after that.
Although they did redo that, and they did brought one of the reasons that the prosecution stated was the gloves didn't fit because it was full of blood. It shrunk. It had been in a bag in the evidence room. So of course it wasn't going to fit. So they brought new gloves, the exact same gloves, and they had Simpson try it on, and yes, indeed, it did fit.
Absolutely. So I just want to get to one piece of evidence that I have missed here, and that was the shoe evidence on the Bruno Maggioli or Maggioli.
Bruno Malo shoes.
Yeah, and that was a bloody shoe impression on the Bronco carpet, and that was consistent with the shoe that O.J. Simpson owned. So that was a huge piece of evidence, and it was very bloody, and it was in the Bronco. And that was a huge piece of evidence, but no piece of evidence was big enough for this jury to convict O.J. Simpson. You could have had a tape of him saying that I murdered her, and they still would not convict for some reason. They had so much DNA evidence and so much DNA testing that it was quite crazy that they did not convict. And I think that if it had been somebody other than O.J. Simpson, that maybe they would have convicted, but those are hypotheticals, and O.J. Simpson came out not guilty.
Yeah, the problem with the evidence. Are we going to discuss the evidence now or later?
Yeah. So I had here as a note that I think that we should really touch on the incompetence by the LAPD and the evidence tampering. I think that that's where you were going.
You mean allegedly?
Yes.
Was it mishandled? I don't know. I think that's probably what the defense wanted people to think, but there was. Yeah. I'm not really sure if there was mishandled.
Yeah, I just think that the police in this situation, I don't think that they were necessarily logical in this situation. And I'll go back a few slides to this man right here, and I think that he played a huge part in this case. This man is Mark Verman, and he was the main detective on the scene. He was probably the first detective on the scene at the Simpson residence, and he also handled the evidence. And I think that the main storyline out of him was he was the star witness, and the defense got this gift from heaven in that he was a racist, and that he was racist towards people of color, and that he had said the N-word on tape. And that really broke down their argument.
Yeah, he did say that he never used the N-word, and then they found tapes that he did say that. He said it many, many times on the tape, but he said that he was playing an actor as a scene, because the woman that was recording wanted to write a screenplay or a book, and she told him, "Listen, I want you to play this character," and that's why he was using, those racist slurs.
Yeah,
that was his take on it.
And that was a key moment.
Yeah, it was. But it was. And then he pleaded the Fifth Amendment when they asked if he planted the glove, which basically just, everyone could have just gone home by then.
Yeah, that was really a turning point in this case. I think that it started out, the prosecution thought that this was a slam dunk. They had 9 or so pieces of DNA evidence linking Simpson to this murder. And it was a slam dunk at first. And then all of this drama happened inside the courtroom, really the trial of the century. And everything played out, and we know what the outcome was. But there were many different storylines in that courtroom, one being Mark Verman. And another one, and this is Marcia Clark's take on this, she said that the judge, I think it was Judge Ito, was sexist towards her in many ways. For instance, not letting her take a look at the evidence beforehand, making fun of a haircut that she had when she came into the courtroom one day. And I think that that was a minor storyline, but a very important one.
Now, did he do that in front of the jury, or the jury was not present?
The jury was not present at that point.
Oh, well, then it's, I mean, it's still wrong, but it didn't influence the jury.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that that was just that played into the courtroom drama that we really saw in this case, and really played into the media, who really hyped this case up. Without the media, this case would not have been so hyped up, but the media really did a good job in hyping this case up, as they do most things.
Yeah, because he was an American hero.
Yeah.
I mean, who didn't like OJ?
So I think that we basically touched on everything that was in the case and in the trial. OJ was eventually acquitted on all counts of murder. However, on February 4th, 1997, a jury in a wrongful death lawsuit brought about by the Ron Goldman family found Simpson liable in a civil wrongful death suit brought about by the families, and it awarded the plaintiffs, which were the Goldman family and some of the Simpson family, $8.5 million in damages. However, OJ has failed to pay a single penny of that.
Well, that's why he went into that room in Las Vegas to take his stuff back, because they were going to sell it and give it to the Goldmans.
Yeah.
The money, or they were going to give the trophies and all his stuff to the Goldmans, because they were rightfully his, because the court, they won that case.
That's a very good point, because on February 10th, 1997, that was, I think, 6 days after the jury gave that 8.5 number, Simpson was ordered to pay $25 million in damages to the two families. That would be split in half. And on March 26th of that same year, the court ordered Simpson to turn over his assets, including a set of golf clubs, his 1968 Heisman Trophy, and an Andy Warhol painting, and they were then awarded to the Goldmans.
Yeah, and he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to give them anything.
Yeah. So O.J. Simpson really led a problematic life after the case, and we touched on that with the book, If I Did It. And also, there were some legal battles about the book. The family of Ron Goldman believed that it was entitled to 40% of any proceeds from the book based on the $24.7 million civil judgment that they won against O.J. Simpson. However, they were not granted that by a Nevada judge. But like we said, O.J. did end up serving some time in prison. I think it was about 10 years. Let me see. No, it was about 9 years in prison. But still, that did not take away from his 1994 case, and I think that played a part in the jury of his 2007 case.
Yeah, that's what they said. They said the judge did not like him and was maybe a little bit of a payback for what happened.
Yeah, so I think that we basically touched on everything that's in this case, the primary objectives. We could go on for 10 years talking about this case,
I just wanted to bring on that you said they had a lot of DNA evidence, and when they did, but the defense stated that all that was, it was all dirty evidence. It was planted. It was manipulated. That it basically told the jury, don't trust the DNA because it's not right, or it was planted.
And I think that that's a great point because of the fact that that the DNA evidence in court cases was so new that the jury didn't necessarily believe it and they didn't necessarily know about it. And I think that the prosecution made it seem like this complicated thing when they could have dumbed it down for average people, not scientists. They use very scientific terms, and they should have just put it in terms that an average person can understand it.
Yeah. Also, they're also very heavy into the domestic abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And once one of the jurors had to be let go for, I don't remember exactly the reason, but they said, listen, we don't care about the domestic abuse. We don't care that he used to beat her. That doesn't mean that he killed her, which is really stunning. I mean, how can you believe that he would beat her and yet not believe that he was also capable of murdering her?
Yeah, and I think that plays perfectly into this superhero that he was for so many people, especially in the California area and the Los Angeles area. He was a prime celebrity, and he was a huge celebrity in that area. And I think that really played a factor in this case and how he was treated overall.
Yeah, it most certainly did. And I don't know. I guess it's difficult to convict someone that is beloved. And you know, people think they know him, but actually they didn't really know anything about him. They didn't know he was beating his wife, and yet when they found out, they didn't care.
Yeah. And as you see, I just brought up a picture on the screen of the moment that OJ was acquitted on all counts of murder in that Los Angeles courtroom. You see Johnny Cochran hugging OJ, and you see the face of Robert Kardashian, and he came out after this case and after OJ had gone through some legal battles, and he actually died, I think, in the early 2000s. But he did an interview with Barbara Walters, and he said that he thinks that OJ Simpson is possibly guilty of this crime, and that face says it all, in my opinion.
Yeah, he looks like he's stunned. But why is he defending him? Why is he there if he believes that he killed Nicole? It just seems so dishonest.
Exactly. And I think that Robert Kardashian was in part persuaded to think that O.J. Simpson did do it by his ex-wife, Kris Jenner, who was a very big advocate for Nicole Simpson. And of course, she was there every single day for her to fight for her friend. And we've touched on a lot of aspects of this case, which was very good. If you wanted to add anything right now about the case, you could do so, but we can move on if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. So I think now we're going to go into the opinion section of this podcast. And what we really think, if we were a juror, how would we see this case? And what these pieces of evidence would do for us. So let's see. Yeah, so I think that if I'm in that jury room and I'm listening to these DNA pieces come out, I mean, I think that I have some doubt as to whether or not he did this crime. I think that the saying is innocent until proven guilty, and that's the precedent that we have here in the U.S. And I think that these pieces of evidence, DNA evidence, really place him at the scene and really tell a story.
They do, but the problem is that his attorneys said that it was all planted.
Yeah, and that was the big thing in court where they really touched on that, and they really persuaded the jurors to think that too.
You have to understand that this was 1 year after the Rodney King, where they saw cops beating the hell out of Rodney King. So there was a lot of mistrust of the police department from the African Americans. They really just did not trust them. They didn't feel that they were treated fairly by them. They felt that they were racist. And then a year later comes the O.J. Simpson trial. And again, the police department is put on a spotlight by the defense. And that lingering mistrust is still there. And that's part of the verdict.
Yeah, that is a very good point. That the same thing happened to Rodney King a year prior, and ever since that incident had happened, much like we saw this year with the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota. I think it was Minnesota, but like many people in that area had a huge mistrust of the police and a huge mistrust that they were working in the people's best interest, and they thought that OJ was being framed, that this was a racist thing, that OJ was racially profiled, and I think that you're right, that had a big playing into the defense storyline that they created.
And then there comes Mark Furman, who basically just confirms everything that they feel. You know, he's a policeman, and he's deemed racist, and he's using the N-word, and he's denying it, and it just brought everything. Everything was always there.
Yeah.
All that mistrust for the police department was still very much present. And when the defense comes and said, listen, you can't believe the police. You see what they do to our communities. You see how they lie. You see how they plant things. It fed into all of that, and they believed it.
That's a great point. Yeah, so that's what the jury was feeling in that situation, and they were feeling outside pressure. And I really have to go, there's a great Netflix series called The People versus O.J. Simpson. It's Sarah Paulson. She's Marsha Clark in that series, and she's quite good. And they really go into the jury and how the jury was treated in this case, and they were treated pretty much like dirt. They were in these conference rooms day in and day out. They couldn't watch TV. They couldn't talk to their families. They had to be in a hotel room together alone with these strangers. And it really goes to show you how these people who might not have been the center of attention were really, really mistreated by the LA prosecution office, and also the city of Los Angeles.
Yeah, and do you really want to go back to your communities and say, and be like, you convicted O.J. Simpson? We loved him. He was our hero. The cops set him up. I mean, that's a tremendous pressure to put on those people, because, they have to go home when everything is done. They have to go home to their communities and live in their neighborhoods. And OJ was so beloved that there was probably going to be backlash.
Yeah. And I just wanted to touch on one thing that I just thought of. OJ is really the center of this trial, of course, the trial of OJ Simpson. It's OJ Simpson, OJ Simpson, OJ Simpson, but it's never Ron Goldman or Nicole Brown Simpson. It's never these people who were the actual victims, and the actual victims, I think, go unheard.
Yeah, unfortunately, that tends to happen with trials. That somehow the victims get lost in the shovel, and it's all about the accused.
Yeah, and I'm going to verify
I
this
meant
right now, but
I
uh,
meant lost in the shuffle, not the shovel.
but I think that yeah, 24. Yeah. So Ron Goldman at the time of this murder, and I think that he's the most overlooked here. I think that the storyline was OJ versus Brown Simpson, and it was this whole thing between the domestic violence and the utter misconduct that was taking place between those two. But I think that Ron Goldman is very much overlooked. He was 26 at the time of his murder. He worked at a restaurant, and I think that his case is simply being at the worst place at the worst time.
Yeah, and everyone who talked about him said that he was a great guy. You know, they really liked him. He would do anything for you.
Yeah.
And it's just such a tragedy.
And I think that he was delivering glasses that the Brown crew had left at a restaurant that night. And
Nicole's mom forgot her glasses. They were having dinner at the restaurant. What is it called? Mezzaluna restaurant. And she forgot her glasses. And he, being the nice guy that he is, volunteered to bring them over to Nicole. And they think that when he came in, you know, that's what he was, the killer was, you know, attacking her and killing her. And then he had to kill Ron, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
Like you said, he was at the worst place at the wrong time.
But I think that Nicole in this situation had more stab wounds than Ron. And that really goes. Go ahead.
Well, she was the first one, because that was the intended victim, was Nicole.
And I mean, this kid walks in and he sees O.J. Simpson or whoever the killer was killing this person. I mean, you have to take care of all of your witnesses to get away.
Right.
If you're the killer.
Exactly.
So this was a terrible case.
And at the end, there was no justice, because OJ was never convicted, and neither was anyone else. So there was no justice for the victims. There was no justice for the family. And here we are 20 some years later, still talking about it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be 27 years maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think if you ask people, which is interesting, where were you when when the OJ verdict came in? I think that a lot of people, if not most, will remember exactly where they were.
Yeah.
I myself was in my basement. We had a TV in the basement, and I was watching, and the verdict came on, and it was unbelievable. It was just stunning.
What was that moment like for you? Was it shock? Was it disbelief? Was it anger?
It was all of those things. It was just, I mean, I honestly, this case just broke my heart, because I even at the end of the day, I figured that they could see through all the minutia and all the nonsense from the defense, and see that, yeah, you know what, he's guilty.
Yeah.
And you know what, they didn't. They said he was not guilty, and it was just stunning.
Yeah. It was definitely something to be in the history books forever. And this case really set a precedent for cases to come, and defense strategies to come. So many people reference this case in terms of how they want to do their prosecution. Lawyers look at this case. Judges look at this case to really get a sense of what happened and what can I do better.
Yeah. Well, you have to be able to afford the dream team.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was like 5 or 6 lawyers. From what I understand, he didn't pay all of his legal bills. So that's good.
Yeah, that is correct. I watched this interview, I think it was on Fox News, with Robert Shapiro, and he said that he has never gotten more than 10 grand from O.J. Simpson.
Well, that's good. I mean, that's what you call karma.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. They just, I don't know. I feel like they just. Well, a defense attorney it's not their job to care if you're guilty or innocent,
Yeah.
or not guilty. Actually, they're there, and they're there to do their job, and that's the way it is.
Yeah.
They have to defend you. They have to defend you to the best of their abilities, and that's what they did, I guess.
And however, on the contrary, the prosecution really has to believe what they're saying. They have to be the most passionate person in that courtroom for the victim who cannot talk.
Yeah, it's much more difficult than being a defense because all you do is muddy the waters.
Yeah.
But when you're the prosecution and you're bringing the case, you have the burden of proof.
Yeah.
Which is much more difficult than they're just saying, well, no, that's planted, and the prosecution's case is much harder.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that we've had a very good conversation, very lengthy conversation into this case, a really big, deep dive into this case. And there are definitely some more cases to come for this podcast. This was very fun. And we have a lot of cases to touch on, such as the murder of Ying Zhang. I think she's coming up. And I also wanted to touch on some other murders that I have written about on my Medium, and as has Anna. And I think that this was a very productive conversation.
Yes, yes, it was. It was very interesting to go back and relive something that was very difficult.
Yeah, it's like a time machine going back in time and talking about all of these details.
That's when I realized that, justice doesn't always prevail. And, a lot of times the guilty people go free.
Yeah.
And
So
you just have to live with it. There's nothing you can do about it.
The U.S. always says justice for all, but is there really justice for all? And I think that the answer to that is a straight up no.
No, especially if you have money and you can buy, the best defense that money can buy. You're going to have a much better shot.
And we see that all of the time with the rich and the powerful and the famous getting off way too easy. One prime example, Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, everybody knew that he was doing what he was doing and nobody cared.
Yeah. That's another interesting case.
Very interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of unanswered questions about that case too.
Yeah, and hopefully they will get answered. And I think that there was really a clear picture that the prosecution set up in this case, but the jury just did not take the bait, and they, in the end, voted not guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder against Orenthal James Simpson.
Yeah, they didn't buy the prosecution's case, or they failed to prove their case.
Yeah. I just want to open it up to you. If you have any last thoughts before we go into our closing, go ahead.
Only that, like I said prior, the victims do not get any justice. No one has ever been arrested, and the families have to go on knowing that there was no justice and that they lost people that they loved very badly, very dearly.
Yeah, and I think that the real victims, and that's a great point, are O.J. Simpson, his children that he had with his ex-wife. And I think that was very sad. I mean, in a sense, they lost both of their parents. They lost their mom, and they lost their dad in spirit. And it was very, very tough for them.
Well, I think they went and lived with their dad after the trial. I believe their kids, which was I believe Sydney and was it Justin?
I think it was Sydney and Justin, yeah. But it
Yeah,
was, I think I
they
have it
went
right.
to live with their father in Florida. And
Yeah,
I think they support their father, and I don't think they feel that the father is guilty.
yeah, and it was Sydney and Justin were the two
Yeah,
children of O.J. Simpson. Justin was born in 1988, and Sydney was born in 1985. And I
yeah.
have it right here. Simpson was granted custody of the children on December 20th, 1996. So they ended up living with him, but it would be interesting to know their perspective on this case. I think it's 20 some odd years later. So that's,
I think they're very private, and they're entitled to their privacy, and they live their lives, and
yeah,
they were victims too.
very much so. Yeah. So this case was just a case of nothing, basically. It was a case of by which point of view you want to take. It was either a case of a random killing by an unknown person or persons, or this was a crime of passion by an ex-lover who was jealous and who wanted to tie up some loose ends. It really could go either way with motive. Was OJ trying to tie up loose ends because he thought that Nicole was going to charge him with violence, or was it just a jealousy thing? We will never know those answers, and we could speculate all we want, but we will never know the truth in this case.
Yes, and we have to respect the jury's verdict, because that's how it's done in the U.S. They were presented the evidence, and that's how they saw it, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah. So I just want to thank you, Anna, for being with us today at the Crime Center. You are a great partner, and you will definitely be back next time, I hope, to discuss some more cases, because you bring a great perspective into our conversation. I think that we had a great discussion today, so thank you for being with us.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Ask me back anytime.
And you could find Anna, just one more thing here, you could find Anna at Anna Coughlin on Medium. She's a very successful Medium true crime writer and has written numerous chilling true crime articles about different cases. She writes one, I think she writes 2 a week or 3 a week, and she's very consistent with her writing. And she is a great follow on Medium, so I just want to give her a quick shout out. And I also want to get in one more time our sponsor. Our book, me and Anna's book, Real Life Murder, is out now on Amazon. It is 99 cents on Amazon, and the link will be in the description below. It's a great book for anybody who loves true crime, everything true crime, from John Benet Ramsey to other cases, other not known cases. It's a great book to pick up. It's a great summer read for this summer. It's out on Kindle right now, so go check that out if you're a true crime fanatic. And I think that we can end it there. So thank you so much for being with us today, Anna, and we will see you next time.
Well, thank you very much.